Good noon, everyone. And we are now about to embark on a modest journey to where I'd like to do. I have three basic objectives. One is to offer a comprehensive way of looking at the Jewish festivals, one which is both simple, but also I think can expose some very deep meanings in the holidays. It's also something, for tour guides, it's very easy to be able to communicate it to people that don't have a background either in Bible at all, people from the East and so on, or people that don't have a very good understanding. It can also, as we're hopefully going to learn, can be very helpful for people that have a significant background, because I think there's some insight that can be done. That's number one. Number two is I would like to highlight some of the features that I think are overlooked, as all of us celebrate all the holidays and we're all familiar from home, but when we go back into the actual verses from the Bible and from Tanakh and from some of the sources, I'd be obviously going on a relatively traditionalist approach, stemming from the rabbi's way of interpreting, but we'll see that also there's some places that we can ask some questions. And my third objective is to point out certain places where the geography and the archaeology of and discoveries of the last century have sort of come to either assist or illuminate our interpretation and understanding of the holidays. So that's what I plan on doing. It is a topic that I've studied extensively, and maybe one day will be published one way or another, but at least here you get an overview. All these things definitely can go on more. There is a chapter 2, which I'm not going to be dealing with today, and that all are the post-biblical holidays, which I feel also relate in a certain way to this calendar, but as I said, that's a separate chapter. So let's get started. When we approach the calendar, we have to realize that the topic of calendar is both a complex one and somewhat controversial, because they're firstly in terms of the calendar itself and how we count time. This is something that we may think somewhat trivial, but in the ancient times it was definitely not, especially in the East, in the Middle East. The counting the exact times of the seasons, of the constellations, whether it's in Egypt, of the rising and of the Nile, the flooding of the Nile. All these things were calculated to degrees that are incredible based on what's today. And there emerged after all this two basic ways of counting, or two basic methods. One obviously is the lunar, and that is a 29.5 cycle, which we call a month. Okay, and from the Gezer calendar, which is accepted somewhere in the maybe 11th or 10th centuries, Canaanite, Israelite, either way, it's culturally fitting to both. It talks about a yarchol, or 2 months. And it doesn't have the names of the month, but it's divided of the season. So here we have, even though we have something which is a month, which is based on the moon. How do I know it's based on the moon? Because it's called a moon. Yerach is a moon, and therefore it's called a monthly cycle. A moon cycle is the basic unit that's being counted. And here we have it almost integrated into a agricultural year. Okay, the agricultural year, Shana, which means the word Shana comes from something that is repetitious, that comes back, that returns, repeats. Chodesh, Yerach, or Chodesh is the new moon, and Yerach is the month, so is the moon. So all these things are connected. This is an amazing piece that was found in Tel Farah, which looks like it's 30 pegs, which might have been a way that they would be able to keep track of what day it was in the moon. So we know that the moon was very important, and also, but even as important as the moon was, there's also a solar calendar, which we'll call the agricultural or the natural calendar. Because even as there is a 29.5-month cycle, there's no lunar year. That we have to be very clear. There's no importance of 12 or 13 or 14 lunar cycles. It could be 6 lunar cycles or 10, but there is, though, a 364 and a quarter day cycle of the solar system, which they were able to understand. And therefore, when we look at ancient cultures, we see some very different types of, before we get into the Bible, we see very different types of calendars. Just for contrast, the Egyptians had a mostly solar calendar. They did have relationships with the lunar months, but the calendar at its essence was solar. It was 365 days of 30-day months. So they did relate to there, but they were set. So you'll ask, well, wait, that doesn't help you, because what about the 5 days? So in Egypt, there was a 5-day holiday at the end of every year, which wasn't really part of the calendar. Okay, now that would have been fine if Egypt would have been a civilization around maybe 200, 300 years, but the Egyptian calendar, because they didn't take into account the extra time over the course of the thousands of years of Egyptian history, they had to adjust the calendar at a few times in order to make sure that their seasons and their months and all were stayed in the same place. So the concept of intercalation, which is going to be the first commandment that is given to the Jewish people in the book of Exodus. We see a chodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim rishon hu lachem lechodshei hashana. This is the first month is your month, the first of your months, and it will be the first of your month. The way the rabbis interpreted this is that the objective of the biblical calendar is to fuse these two. Is to the one hand, the dominant force will be the lunar, and this represents the hitchadshut, the renewal that both you have to do personally every month and they have to do as a collective, but also the static and the eternal, which is the solar calendar, which you have to have the lunar and the solar work in tandem together. And the way you do that is by two things. One is Ibor Chodesh, which means that every month is either 29 or 30 days, and every year is 12 months, but every 2 or 3 years you have to add another month in order that the seasons, or particularly the spring holiday, but as I'm going to show, it's not only Pesach, but it's all the holidays that follow, have to fall in their appropriate agricultural seasons. These are things that are more or less known. This is just an introduction that can be dealt with independently. We should be aware there is a little bit of a controversy regarding what was actually used in the Bible. There was a theory that the Bible had a solar calendar, and there are a few places like the Mabul and Mamad Har Sinai and a few other places as well, where it sounds like they're using or at least aware of a solar year. I think, though, the evidence points in the direction that they did have a dual calendar. One, they used both terminologies, but there are a few other places you see where in Chizkiyahu, where he adds another month. Also, a possible interpretation of the holiday that Yeravam that adds after the split between the two kingdoms. He adds. It says that he adds. They celebrate in the month after Sukkot, Asher Bada Milibo, that he made up from his heart, that he imagined from his heart. But it could just be that he didn't change anything so drastic, but just did an Ibor Shana, did a leap year, added a month, and therefore was able to celebrate Sukkot the next month and be in conflict with Jerusalem. So I'm leaving that topic aside, but in essence, the idea of a calendar, at least the way it comes out from the rabbis, is number one, The calendar is something that is the responsibility of the people, and the Beit Din, the high court, was as the representative of the people, has to determine. And this is very key, because the holidays, at least the main holidays, are supposed to be Moadei Hashem Mikra'ei Kodesh Asher Tikru Otam B'Moadam, that you call holy, meaning that, at least according to the rabbinical holidays, again in Qumran and the Sadducees had a different way of looking at it, the holidays are established by man, or by the Jewish people, which means that if it wasn't for the Jewish people, the holiness of those holidays just wouldn't exist. This in contrast to Sabbath. Shabbat, that holiness is from the 7 days of creation, and what we do on the Shabbat is just acknowledge or join in with that sanctity, but the sanctity and the holiness of the holidays is something that's uniquely created by the experience of man. And this is something that we can further explore as we go through the holidays. So I'd like to I'd like to differentiate between 4 different levels of meaning within every single holiday, at least as we say in the core ones. One is an agricultural. What's going on in the field? What is Farmer Joe doing during this time of year? The second, in Jewish history, particularly the original, the foundation years, but not exclusively, especially in chapter 2, when we talk about the continuation of Jewish history, and how those two interplay with one another. And how the third level is how these two aspects are commemorated, celebrated in the liturgy of the temple, both in biblical and in the rabbis. And the final, which can be divided in many different ways, but is how this holiday and these traditions are perpetuated, celebrated, and in the home, rituals and customs. So, when we look at the different holidays, and as we go through, you'll see here, I've put down here 5 holidays. You might be familiar with what it says in Exodus, where it says, Shalosh pamim b'shana yira'eh kol zechurcha et pnei Adon Hashem. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign Lord. This is the Shloshet HaRegalim, which are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Chag HaMatzot Tishmor, the Feast of the Harvest, and the Feast of the Gathering. Okay, so those are the 3 main holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. But looking a little bit more deeper, we can see that the holiday of Matzot actually has another holiday adjoined to it, and that's the holiday of Pesach. We also see that the holiday of Sukkot has another day, which is added on, Shmini Atzeret, which is definitely part of the same pilgrimage holiday, but it has its own sacrifice and its own unique meaning, and that we will hopefully explore as you. So we could begin with Rosh Hashanah. Where are the Chagei Tishrei? We'll meet them when they come in. We're going to start, as the Jewish people did, with the first holiday that they were introduced to, and that is Chag HaPesach, the Paschal holiday. And what's the meaning of that? First of all, what's going on in the field? Okay, the field is Aviv. What is Aviv? Aviv means, right, we can see from Exodus 9:31. Now the flax and the barley were ruined. This is talking about what happened during the plague of the barad, of the hail. It says that the flax and the apishta v'asera nukata ki asera aviv v'apishta giv'ol. The barley was in the ear and the flax was in the bud. So anybody that's named Aviva, and there might be somebody here, I don't see everybody's name, should know that the name doesn't necessarily translate literally to spring. The shoresh aviv, or biv, is something that is long and hollow, like biyuv, it's hard, biyuv, or abuv, right, where you're in the abuvim of the tubes that you're going through the Jordan on, abuvim. It's all the same shoresh, it's all the same root, and the idea is when the wheat is standing firm, then there is the farmer can finally look out and go, there's no celebration, it's not festive, it is not you don't have the final happiness because there's no real accomplishment, but it's a very important landmark in this process that you began a few months ago with we'll talk about when we get to Sukkot and after Sukkot, but with the plowing and the praying and the rain and so on, and you finally have the Aviv. Aviv is where you see potential, where it's right before the potential is fulfilled. There is no actual fulfillment. There's no, and that is the concept of what's going on in both Pesach and Chag HaMatzot, although I'm differentiating here slightly. Now, when does Chag HaPesach actually begin? And if you look very carefully in the sources, and I did not bring them here, but you can look very carefully, every single time that Pesach is mentioned, its date is the 14th day at noon, is the beginning. It doesn't say when it ends, and there's a dispute whether it ends at 12 o'clock midnight or the following morning. And the Chag HaPesach is a holiday which is quite unique because it overlaps with Chag HaMatzot. It's going to be starting on the 15th in the evening, okay? But it's not the same holiday. The Chag HaPesach is where the central feature is, of course, the Korban Pesach, is the Paschal Lamb, is the Korban. But what is the importance in Jewish history? And let's try to answer that. Because it's not leaving Egypt. Because in the 14th in the afternoon, they didn't leave Egypt. And so for here, I think the most important source is to go back to Ezekiel chapter 20, where if you're reading there, you see a completely different type of a story than you see in the book of Exodus. And what you see in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, is that God wanted to take the Jews out of Egypt, and they refused. They did not want to. The people didn't get rid of the idol worship, and they kept going in their ways. That the centuries of living in Egypt had completely overtaken the Jewish people, and they weren't ready to leave. Now, this is something that we see later on in rabbinic literature, particularly in Zohar, that talks about the Jewish people going down to the 49th level of impurity, and had they been one more minute in Egypt, they wouldn't have been redeemable. We even see that some of the people in the rabbinic ideal were even killed off during the plague of darkness, that some chamushim yatsu, that only a fifth were worthy of leaving. And so in order to, the way we're going to interpret the Paschal Lamb is twofold. Number one, we can divide it into three. Number one is the pushing away of the idol worship. And this is the theme that's coming out, that when you take you take the lamb on the 10th day of Nisan beforehand, which is an active sign that you're pushing away Egyptian culture, because the basic understanding is the lamb, or the one-year-old lamb, was holy to Egyptian culture. Now, there isn't really a particular god that was so important to the lamb that's 1 year old, not that we know of at least. But let's just say that basically every type of feature of nature, both celestial beings and animals, was probably worshipped in some way or another in Egypt. But it was more importantly is the act that a person took to leave Egyptian culture and push it away, and that is the importance of Paschal Lamb, number one. Number two, and then to take the blood and put it in the doorpost so you don't get killed when God appears to do the smiting of the firstborn. The second feature, though, is something that we say every single year in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, and we say V'hi she'amda lavotenu v'lanu, and that is what stands for us and our forefathers. And if we look very carefully, what's the V'hi? The V'hi is the Avtacha, the promise. And what promise is that? The Brit Bein HaBitarim, the covenant that God made with Abraham in slicing the animals in half, right? This covenant, the covenant with the forefathers, is exactly what the Paschal Lamb was supposed to remind everyone of. So you don't quite slice it in half, because that's not so. We don't do that, because when you have to eat it, you have to But it's the idea of going back to that promise is that we're conjuring up. So the two aspects so far, one is the Paschal Lamb being the source of merit in order to leave Egypt. Number two is the pushing away Egyptian, it's part and parcel of the same idea, is pushing away Egyptian culture, Egyptian idol worship, and reminding God and the Jewish people of the covenant that was made with the forefathers. All those things are about Pesach Mitzrayim. So what is Pesach Dorot, what is the Paschal Lamb of the generations, is when the Jewish people bond with that covenant to the Lord. And therefore, this covenant was so important that everyone had to join in with it, because this is basically the foundation covenant of the Jewish people. And if you're not there, you're not a part of it. And therefore, there is the excommunication, the karet, which comes along with anybody that does not join in, and therefore there's even a makeup a month later on the 14th that anybody that missed it can still join in with the covenant. So there's much more to talk about the Paschal Lamb, but that's the basic idea. Again, it's remembering the lamb in Egypt and remembering the things that led up to the redemption, not the actual redemption itself. And therefore, when we can add to here Seder night, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling of the story. It's all part of this standing at the doorstep of Jewish history. And that's exactly what the different customs and everything is coming in. The second holiday in our list is the festival of unleavened bread, which also has quite a interesting Chag HaMatzot. We have to eat matzah. So only according to one of the rabbis do you actually have to eat matzah. But the main part of Chag HaMatzot is the removal of all of Hametz and Seor, getting rid of all of leaven and starter dough. What's the big deal about leaven? What makes leaven so bad? What's the meaning of Hametz? So in later rabbinic literature, suggestions include that it's haughtiness, that it is a sign of the evil heart, gava, the chametz that gets larger and so on. But I'm not saying that those are incorrect, but there's a few things that have to be understood. Number one is that in the temple service, almost all of the offerings were actually matzah. They were not chametz. There were two offerings that were chametz every year. One is a recurring, and that is the Karban Todah. The Thanksgiving offering is chametz all year round. So if it's something evil, then how are you bringing it in the Karban Todah, in the Thanksgiving offering? And the second option of chametz, and the second time is going to be in Shavuot, our next holiday, where we bring 2 loaves of wheat that is leavened bread. So we're bringing this to the temple. Hametz can't be something that is inherently evil, but we get rid of it for 7 days. And this is something that definitely we can expand upon, but briefly saying, if there was any one thing in the culinary world that symbolized Egyptian culture, beyond anything else, it would be the special breads of Egypt, also the beer. But particularly for the household use, it would be breads and the breads and the leaven. The sophistication of the breads in ancient Egypt, the sophistication of how they were able to manipulate yeasts and sourdoughs, they had almost, and these were things that were kept. Some of these recipes were kept by the Egyptians. That's why they didn't really buy the priests. There were special priests that were in charge of these processes, and it's an unbelievable thing. So the idea is that chametz is nothing inherently wrong with the bread, but the idea is, and we treat the chametz as if it's idol worship for 1 week, because this represents Egyptian culture, which we now have to rid ourselves of in order to leave Egypt. It's not about leaving Egypt, it's about extracting Egypt from the Jewish people, which we see as they go through the desert. They weren't so successful in completely, but it's the first stage. And therefore the chametz we treat as idol worship. What do we do to it? We have to burn it. We have to destroy it. We can do bitul. What's bitul? Bitul is a nullifying it. which the Rishonim had a really big problem of how you actually do it, and came to even a monetary way of hefker. But that's not the idea. The idea is bitul, just like bitul with avodah zarah, nullifying idol worship and saying it no longer has any meaning. And that is the cultural meaning, the deeper meaning of Hametz. So as part of the holiday, right after we do the bringing the AVIV, we start the barley harvest, and that's the Omer. The Omer, which is brought on the second day of Pesach, and we start to count for 50 days, and we get to our next holiday, which is going to be Shavuot. That's Sfirat HaOmer. Omer is the measure of barley, which is going to be brought in the temple. Now, the barley, which is the most crude and simple of the grains, is the initiation of the new years of grain. The first barleys are only ready on Pesach, and barley is also even considered to be mostly the meal of animals, animal feed. But we count connecting the Omer to the next holiday. When is the next holiday, and what is the next holiday? By the way, I'll just add a little bit, if we're dealing with Pesach and Chag, that the seventh day of Pesach, or seventh day of Chag HaMatzot, to be exact, commemorates the actual crossing of the Dead Sea, which was the process of leaving Egypt. The 7 days were part of this process of, they couldn't just leave Egypt after so many years of being there physically and culturally, that it's considered to be a process. And finally, the splitting of the sea and going through on the seventh day was the end of that process. But we'll leave that for now. And we continue to the Omer, leading up to the receiving of the Torah at Sinai. Wait, it doesn't say that. What is Shavuot? So if you look very carefully, there are names of Shavuot. It's Chag HaKatzir, the harvest holiday. It is Chag HaBikurim. We'll talk about that in a moment. That's a little bit, it's where you bring the Minchat Bikurim, which is the Shtei HaLechem, the meal offered, the 2 loaves that I spoke about. It is 50 days from the beginning of the Omer. But we call it Matan Torah. Is it really Matan Torah? Does it say that anywhere? No, it does not. And therefore, if you notice here, it's in parentheses. I should have put this here. Receiving the Torah at Sinai. So the first place actually that mentions receiving the Torah at Sinai is the Book of Jubilees. But the Book of Jubilees, as mentioned, like the Qumran sect, had a solar calendar, a set solar calendar, which meant that it was actually on the 16th day, would have been on Sunday, was the holiday of Shavuot in the Jubilees, which they commemorated the giving of the Torah. And so here we have to come to a little bit of a complex way of understanding that I think the convergence with the holiday of Shavuot, and this needs to be explained a little bit more, but hopefully this will be enough. There's a convergence of about 3 or 4 different themes, which are all on possibly different days. What are they? One is the Chag HaKatzir. Now, when are you celebrating the Katzir? When do you celebrate the harvest? So there are 3 potential options to celebrate the harvest. Number 1 is the first day of the harvest. That's not very exciting to celebrate, but I'm sure you go out there and great festivity begin. There's the end of the harvest. Now, when is the end of the harvest? Sometime in the middle of the summer, in the middle of June, maybe, the next few weeks. Go out to the fields, and you'll see some fields, it happens all at a different time. There's no one date where you're going to finish all the harvest. Okay, so it's sometime in the summer. But there's another holiday or another day that's unique to the harvest. And I think we can see that day or see that time period in the book of Ruth, which we read, Ashkenazim read, on the holiday of Shavuot. And that is the height of the wheat harvest. When you're there's almost like this, there's this festive atmosphere. When everybody goes out to the field, Boaz is sleeping out in the field. There's this excitement, almost has a music of the cutting down all the, there's this excitement. That is the festivity of Shavuot. Now, when should we celebrate it? If we celebrate the harvest holiday, the beginning of the spring holiday on the 15th of the month, and Sukkot we're going to see we celebrate the gathering holiday on the 15th, it should also be on the 15th. So the harvest holiday should be on the 15th day of Sivan, which would have been earlier this week. Today is the 19th day. But if we also want to connect it to the day that the Torah was given, and we want to connect it to the 50 days from the Omer, which its themes are also connected, it's a growing period, and those ideas are seemingly evident, then something had to happen. And what's very interesting, if you look at the Bible, there's no date to the holiday of Shavuot. There's also, it looks like when you read in the book of Yitro, there's no date to the giving of the Torah. It doesn't say when it happened. It almost looks like it was erased. It says, on B'chodesh Shlishi, in the third month, Ba'yom Hazeh Ba'u Har Sinai. On that day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, which means, what does that mean? It probably said Ba'yom HaShlishi or Ba'yom HaRishon. It could have said any day, but it intentionally omits a date for the day. Now, why is this? Because if the months are determined by the Beit Din, and we have 2 months from Pesach to Shavuot, then there are 3 potential days that Shavuot could fall on every single year, dates, right? 1, if both months are complete, both months are 30 days. 1 month is 30 and 1 is 29, or both are 29. Dalet, Hey, and Hey, Vav, and Zayin, Sivan were all days that Shavuot could fall on legitimately. So in order to converge these 3 different things, 1, the holiday of the 15th of Sinai. This is from Mordechai Breuer. Anybody that wants to look where it's from, these are not ideas that only began with, that I made up on my own. One is the other is the other theme is the giving of the Torah and the 50 days from the Omer. They all can converge thematically once you omit the dates of all these and have them on the holiday of Shavuot, which each year is on a day, and you have all those 3 legitimate things. But again, we ignore the date because the date isn't what's important when we celebrate Shavuot. You can also, go on with that theme, is that the Torah is given in a place that has no set place, in a time that has no set time. It's beyond time and beyond place. But those are all homiletics already. We don't have to get ourselves bowed down on. But even on the on a basic level, that is what's happening. Now, in terms of Bikurim, so we have this image, and in Israel you have these big baskets of fruit. Now that's wonderful, but which of these fruits, by the way, only the 7 species that are unique to the land of Israel were brought Bikurim to the temple. The peaches and the kiwis would have to stay behind, and the cherries as well. But pomegranates, grapes, are they ready? Dates, figs, are they ready? The name kites comes from the act of harvesting figs. So the only bikurim that you brought on Shavuot were the bikurim of the wheat. And that's the holiday of wheat. Okay, so when we say bikurim, we have to be careful. It's not the whole fruits. Most of the fruits were brought from Shavuot all the way until Sukkot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. These are important for tour guides to understand, because when you talk about the fruits of the land and the 7 species, you have to be aware when each one of them has their thing. And they begin with the wheat, the beginning of the summer, and as the summer progresses, we're going to see most of the fruits, by the way, are ready at the just end of the summer, which is when the end of the kites, the dates are ready, the figs are ready, the pomegranates, and grapes. And the one fruit is not going to be ready yet. Which one is that? We all know that's Zayit, and that's going to be ready only Hanukkah time, or a little bit before Hanukkah, because both in grapes and in olives, the purpose is not the grapes or the olives, it's the wine and the oil. And the first wines, the first good wines, and this are probably going to be ready when? Around Rosh Hashana time. So then it's ready. Then you can have your next party. So you wait till your next party until you get the good wines, and that brings us to Rosh Hashanah, which is the most complicated of the holidays when you go back to the Bible, because it actually doesn't really ever say Rosh Hashanah in the Bible. The only time, the closest we get is when it says, it is Lamb the Lord your God looks after on, okay, Mereshit Shana ad Acharit Shana. That God's eyes look the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Okay? So the Reshit Shana, the rabbis explain this is Rosh Hashanah. Brenze Rosh Hashanah. The only time it said Rosh Hashanah actually is in another source, which it looks a little bit. Now the rabbis actually didn't have one Rosh Hashanah; they had 4 Rosh Hashanah, or some only had 3. Okay, it says there are 4 new years. Again, we're talking about a cycle. If you have a cycle that goes every year, any point in the cycle, you can say this is the beginning and this is the end. We choose a significant landmark along the cycle to say it's a special time. The first of Nisan is the new year for kings and for festivals. The way we count the months, Rosh, Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, in the Bible, only the names. The 3 names of months in the Bible, Yerach, Eitanim, Bul, and Ziv, are probably Canaanite names, which we have no other sources that mentioning them. But we also, and we do have other Canaanite names of months, but we use the month that we use, the names of the month that we use are the Babylonian names, which we adopted during the Persian period, as the Persian had the Babylonian calendar. So we have Nisan is there. Elul is the new year for Tiz of the beast. The Maaser Behema, remember that, is the first of Elul. The first of Elul, we begin the Slichot, but that's not in the... There is a important thing for anybody that has animals. They have to line them all up and take off 1/10. Okay, the appraisal holiday, and that's going to be very important. The first of Tishrei, and the Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon, which seems to be the most unimportant line of the entire Mishnah, the first of Tishrei. I think that's one of the most important things to understand Rosh Hashanah, and we'll get to that in a moment. And the first of Tishrei is a new year for years, Shemitah, Jubilees, and the planting and tithing of vegetables, and so on. All the major things are going to be there. And Shvat, we all know, is the birthday for the trees. That's another chapter 2. We should also be aware, before we go into Rosh Hashanah anymore, that amongst the rabbis, there was a dispute whether or not the world was created in Nisan or in Tishrei. Meaning, our understanding the world was created on the Rosh Hashanah, and that is the basic understanding of it. It's not something that was it wasn't agreed upon amongst all the rabbis. It's one we adopted. Rabbi Ben Nun likes to see it as seeing whether the particularism of the Jewish people, which is looking at Nisan as the beginning of everything, and that's the way we started the class, or the universalistic approach, where we look at the world. Okay, but each one, but the rabbi that says that it all begins at Nisan, the world was created in Nisan. So obviously something else is going on here. What's happening on Rosh Hashanah? We're beginning to start what's called the Chagei Tishrei, the holidays of Tishrei, which have their own dynamic and are their own unit. Okay, we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret. Looking at this verse from the book of Ezekiel, which says the following. It says, in the 25th year of our exile, on the 14th year after the city had fallen, at the beginning of the year, literally, Rosh Hashanah. And we see Rosh Hashanah used here. Now, the rabbis understood Rosh Hashanah here this is a very unique circumstance when it's the end of the Yovel, the end of the 49 years, 7 Shemitah series. The next year is a Yovel, and Rosh Hashanah falls out on Yom Kippurim. This is the 10th day of the Asor LaChodesh. So the 10th day of the 7th month, which would be Yom Kippurim. That's where the rabbis interpret it. But the basic understanding, and this is comparing to about 7 other verses in the book of Ezekiel, is that this, when it says the year and it says the day, what's in the middle? The month. Namely, this entire month, or the entire time period between Rosh Hashanah, what we call Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom Tru'ah, until Shmini Atzeret are all a complete time period Rosh Hashanah. Because I'm going to ask a question, right? Sukkot. Is it the beginning of the year or is it the end of the year? It's the gathering of the harvest for the previous year. That's the celebration. But it's also the beginning of the year because we've already passed Rosh Hashanah. We changed the calendar. So we're going to get back to Sukkot in a moment. Let's just first do Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur quickly. Rosh Hashanah has 2 other days. It's either called Yom Tru'ah, the day of the blowing of the horn, of the shofar, and it's also called Yom HaZikaron. Now, what's the idea? And this can be developed a lot more, but I think we can go back to now we know the themes that the rabbis adopted were accepting God as our king and all of humanity, including the Jewish people, coming to judgment, the day of judgment. Now, then in 10 days later, we're going to, after the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, we're going to have a day where we get to atonement, which comes after the judgment. Now, that seems to be a problem in the series, but when you understand it in this way, it's not really, because what's going on. Let's go back to our farmer. Let's go back to Farmer Joe. What's going on in the field? You're about to do your gathering. What's happening? This is the appraisal. This is the holiday of all of the accountants. This is the April 15th. This is when you take everything that you have and you see how much you have, what came in from the fields, what went out the year before. This appraisal that is paralleled in conceptually in the Yom HaZikaron. You have to remember things, where we remind God of his promises to the Jewish people, we remind God of their merits and their faults, and we're judged, and the entire world is judged. And we adopt the theme of the rabbi's theme that it's all of humanity. We begin the next calendar year, which is the next part of that cycle. We also begin the entire time period of Rosh Hashanah, which will end at the end of Sukkot, because the end of Sukkot is the end. The Sukkot holiday is going to have the dual theme. Shmini Atzeret is already completely of the new year, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so that's Rosh Hashanah, and there's much more we can talk about as well. But then we move on to Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is atonement. But as most people make the mistake saying it's Yom Kippur, never it's called Yom Kippur in the Bible, it's always Kippurim. What is actually happening? You go through the biblical verses, it's very clear. What's happening is, every single year, the temple needs to be cleansed. Now, with the amount of blood that was on Temple Mount, they had to have tons of water that was used. That's not the idea. That was every single day. Okay? The cleanse, and it's not the dust that accumulates after a year, although that was probably done as well. The cleanse is the fact that God allows his presence to dwell amongst the Jewish people on a very high level. And that can't be if the Jewish people are in sin. This is what was given over in the 13 attributes of mercy. And so the 13 attributes of mercy allow God's presence to dwell amongst the Jewish people on the condition that they cleanse it every year. And if it's so, all the sins that you do are pushed off, and if you repent, then you won't be punished. And the Day of Atonement, which is the day that Moshe came down and gave these 13 attributes of mercy to the Jewish people, and every year it's the same year, going back to the same cycle. Okay, that is this day that needs to be commemorated, and that's the cleansing day of the temple, and that's why the whole thing is about cleansing of the person, and then you're ready to. So it's part of the Rosh Hashanah, but also relates to the entire time period. And it's a sort of like a gift that God gave the Jewish people that allows his presence to dwell. If they wouldn't cleanse the temple is a physical being, but it's a representation of God dwelling amongst the Jewish people, then God wouldn't be able to dwell, and he wouldn't be able to exist, if you will, on that intensive level. Okay, so that's the concept of Yom Kippur. We should be aware of that sin, all of the sacrifices that are brought on sin are only on sins that are committed inadvertently. There is no sacrifice in the temple that's given over something that's done with intent. If you have intent to do something wrong, the temple is not a place that's going to help you. But that is something that does impure the Jewish people and not be clean. That's the purpose of the scapegoat, the Sa'ir Azazel, that is sent off probably to some place near Jabal el-Muntar, which you can see from Malay Adumim. Some people can see it out their windows, right? Jabal el-Muntar. I have a dream of doing jeep tours there. I suggest using watermelons. The live alternative is both a little cruel, unnecessary if you're not doing the actual korban, but I think a watermelon or overripe watermelon would really do the trick. In any case, that's the idea. There is that is atoning for all the zdonot, the sins that are committed intentionally, and there again is the supplement that allows God's presence to exist. Now, Sukkot is one of the interesting ones because in Sukkot we see that it's after Rosh Hashana, but it's the end of last year, it's the beginning of next year. We also have two main themes, which both have themes of beginning of the end, but I would like to suggest, as following Rav Meidan, is that there are main themes of the Sukkah and of the Arba Minim, which one relates to the conclusion of the year, and one relates primarily to the beginning of the next year. In terms of the conclusion of the year, we can look at this chapter, which I brought part of in the book of Deuteronomy. The entire one you can read on your own, but I'll point out here, which does not, I will repeat, does not refer specifically to the holiday of Sukkot, but it is the meaning of the holiday of Sukkot. And it talks about when you come in that, here we can start over here. As you reminding the Jewish people that the walking through Holacha Bamidbar of the desert wasn't the purpose of walking through the desert for 40 years was not was in order that everybody dies, but that was part of it. But it was an educational experience. What was the intent is that you learn throughout this entire time that everything that you get, all of your food and all of your basic necessities are coming from God. And you learn that for 40 years. And even though you go into the land and you're going to get all the things you need, you have to remember this. How do we do that? What's the threat? And the threat is right here. When you have eaten your fill and you have built fine houses, remember that, houses, batim tovim, and your herds and flocks and everything, you have gold and silver increased, beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God. Right? What's the threat? That you're going to have everything you need, you're going to forget God. That is why you go out to the sukkah. What is a sukkah? A sukkah, so the rabbis again talked about the ananei kavod that are sukkot mamash, that they were real tents or they were the ananei kavod, which thematically relate to God's protection of the Jewish people during the desert. But everybody in Israel knows what a sukkah was. Sukkah kerem. A sukkah is a temporary hut that you have in the field. And it's where a farmer will live during the final months of harvest and gathering. Why? Because one, it's a schlep to go into your field and your house every single day. It could be a few kilometers away, your fields from your home or from the town. And two, you want to protect your field and protect what you've grown every day. And so this sukkah, when you leave your house, which is now filled with everything that you've collected over the year, now you're ready. And instead of celebrating in the ideal way that you could, because now this is finally a time that you can celebrate. Us Jews, we don't celebrate. We're always feeling guilty about celebrating. Now is the time you don't have to feel guilty. Right? On Pesach, we're just leaving Egypt. We haven't fulfilled anything yet. The receiving of the Torah, Sukkot, is also just part of the journey. We haven't gotten there yet. We've harvested. We're definitely one more step, but we're not yet there. The gathering holiday, when you collect everything into your house and you have everything you need, then you can finally celebrate, and that is why Sukkot is called Ichad, is Yom, that is the Zman Simchatenu. This is the time of happiness. This is the time of pure and whole happiness. What do? We leave the house. We leave the house, go back into the field. Again, we don't go into the field, we go to the backyard or into the Merpeset. But it's going into a place that's going to remind us of when we walked through the desert and we were protected by God's clouds and God's protection, which is going to remind us that everything that we have in our storehouses is from God. It is not something that came from Kochi ve'otzem yadi, from my own hands, and so on, what it says over here. Okay, so that is my own hands have won this wealth for me. So that's, but then we have the Arba Minim, and we have an Arava, later on the Nisuch HaMayim. Where is the four species coming in? So the four species also are thanking God from all the corners of the land of Israel and from all kinds of other, actually that's a Samaritan idea, which is a very nice one. It's a thankful offering, but there's another element. If you look in the Hallel prayer that we sing along with the Lulav, we have on one hand thanking God from the previous year, but I think the more dominant theme is praying for the most important thing that's coming up, and that is rain. That what's on the mind of every single farmer as they're ready to embark on the next year is, I need rain. And as much as we're now with all of our desalination plants and the great year of rain we had, water is still symbolizes human survival. We have to realize, though, that even if we did a few years of water, no one's going to die. But if they didn't have enough water, there was imminent danger of either starvation or death, which is very, very difficult. And therefore, the praying for rain was a tremendous theme in Sukkot. As much as we're thanking God for everything that we got in the past year, we're already ready to pray for rain. And during this time period, we're also judged on the rain, meaning that God is going to give the year's measure of rain on Hoshana Rabbah, which is the last day of Sukkot. And so there are many different nice explanations of the four species, but I think the predominant one following this line is that each one of these different species has a very unique relationship with water. When you're walking through the desert and you see an oasis, what do you see? You see palm trees. You see water in the middle of nowhere. Palm trees need that water in the middle of nowhere. Hadassim are a demonstration of abundance of water. The myrtle is where there's abundance of water and represents that. The etrog, the citron, is a very unique relationship with water and how it's grown. Not going to go into it right now, but it's very unique in how it grows. It grows almost all year round. It's a very special relationship of a tree with water. And the final one is the Arava, which is a very special, very special characteristic, and that is every single day they would, and a feature that the Arava was brought to the temple during the holiday of Sukkot, and they put a big Arava, a willow branch, and they would put it next to the temple. They'd walk around the temple and they'd put it there. What's happening to the Arava? And this, anybody that has the Arava sees, it wilts very quickly. Without water, without 1 day of water, it starts to die. And so the idea, I think, of the theme of the Arava, and that it will happen every single day. If you go down to Motza and you bring one up every single day, is that that just like the Arava is completely dependent on water and it's crying out for water, so too are we crying out for water. In addition to those things, we're also going to do something else. That's called the Nisuch HaMayim. What's Nisuch HaMayim? Is this an unbelievable ceremony, the most amazing ceremony of all year, because it had two parts of it. One is it would go down to the Shiloach, now not a spring. This is where they got confused. They went down to the Shiloach pool and drew water. What's so amazing with what they found near David, I didn't bring a picture here, but hopefully everybody's aware of it, is that there are two sections. Where the water is flowing directly above the pool is still Mayim Chaim. It's still coming directly from the Gihon spring. Then it used to flow over the steps and fill up the pool, which there's actually a Mishna in Para that talks about the Para Aduma that I think refers to this, is that you only are allowed to take from the upper waters because those were the Mayim Chaim as opposed to lower water. Anyway, you took this water, you brought it up to the temple, you would spill it out on the temple, and then you'd have a huge party, an all-night party, and the all-night party would end with this, right? And that was called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which we reenact today. But what's the idea of spilling out water on the temple? This is the end of the year. right? We can almost remind us of the story of Elijah. Elijah, after 3 years of no rain, right? He stopped the rain for 3 years. What does he do? He builds an altar, right, with 12 stones, and then he pours 12 jugs of water on it. Okay, 12 jugs of water. Imagine what people were standing around there were thinking. There's no water to drink, and he's spilling it out on his altar. It's a demonstration of faith, but it demonstration of faith that your water only comes from God. Gichon means to spurt out. It's very possible that the springs in Jerusalem were not completely reliable all year round, and that Jerusalem was dependent on the water of the rains that would fill up the cisterns, which by Sukkot are definitely empty. And therefore, by spilling out water on the altar, we demonstrate pure faith, and that is the act of prayer, the act of requesting rain for the next year. This act of faith becomes the act of the water. Now, as I'm coming up to some of my final comments, what's left? Now we're looking at our thing here. We have Aviv, so we filled in this one. What is Shmini Atzeret? What is Shmini Atzeret? So today we're familiar with Simchat Torah, but everyone should be aware that that the yearly cycle of reading the Torah is a relatively late custom. The custom in Eretz Yisrael was about every 3.5 years to finish. They're actually learning the weekly portions, and the Babylonian method, which was every year, the portions are really too long to learn them properly, so they would divide them up to 3.5 years. Okay, we now adopted the yearly one and chose the day of Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, to be the day that we complete the entire cycle. Now, this day of Shmini Atzeret, it could be, what is its historical component? So we have given it its meaning as Torah, again, after the Babylonian tradition. But I would suggest, and there might be a little bit of a hint of it with the Haftorah that we do on Shmini Atzeret, on Simchat Torah, is that if Sukkot was the wandering through the desert, and you go out to a hut to remind yourself that you shouldn't be haughty in your house, the purpose of Shmini Atzeret, any of people that come from the Hasidic tradition know this, you have to go into your house. Without going into your house, you cannot fulfill the ideals of Shmini Atzeret. And so I would suggest that there was an alternative the rabbis could have given to the meaning of Shmini Atzeret. It could have been Yom HaAtzmaut, entry to the land. That could have been what we would recognize on Shmini Atzeret. But instead, for many reasons, probably because many of these things might have been done when there was no longer a dominion over them, and too many people were there. There might have been other reasons as well. That isn't the day chosen to remember this. We have Yom HaAtzmaut as a separate day now. But it's, I mean, again, we still have the Haftorah of Yehoshua, but the celebration of the Torah, which is the main feature of the Jewish people, is going now to be on Shmini Atzeret. I will end with just two more little things. Number one, what are the hakafot shniot, which is what everybody's going to see, is that there are some communities which, because Shmini Atzeret is 2 days, that even outside of Israel will do 2 nights of hakafot. But the story is that group of donors, this is a very important story for tour guides to know, a group of donors of the Diskin orphanage were in Yerushalayim for Sukkot, and they wanted to have a minyan for Chutz La'aretz. This was not something that was overly acceptable or overly known. And Rav Diskin came to Rav Kook and asked Rav Kook, is this allowed? Rav Kook said, absolutely not. And he asked again, I have a group of donors that needed, they said, listen, I'll let them do hakafot. I'll let them have a minyan. But there has to be a band. If there's they cannot publicly demonstrate that they're from Chutz La'aretz and that they're going back. That would be an embarrassment to the land of Israel. But if there's a band there, then it's obvious that they're not doing this on holiday, and therefore then it would be okay. And that was the beginning of the Hakafot Shniot. that is now something that's widespread all over the country, but that was the story there. So what I've tried to do here is, again, there are a few peppered here and there, a few little insights that I've did, but it gives a comprehensive way of looking at the holidays, which each one fit into their time of the agricultural importance, Jewish history in the temple, and then the customs in home, which I didn't have time to go into, but obviously there's much, much more that you can do, and everybody on their own can sort of can expand on those, but they all fit within this this system. So again, I'm not I don't think this is recreating the wheel. It's just something that will help everyone sort of contextualize both within the agricultural, which I think is the most important thing for people coming from Europe, people coming from Asia or from southern hemisphere that aren't familiar with the seasons the way it is, when they can appreciate what's going on here during Pesach, during Sukkot, during Shavuot. And as I said, each one of these things is related. So what's the next stage? What's the next thing that you have to do after Shmini Atzeret? You start plowing. And that's, let's say, Tkufat Avot. And you start praying. And the entire month of the winter is special for the praying and the plowing. As I said, this is the end of this thing, but it doesn't end there. It continues all the way. The last year will continue all the way and will end really with Hanukkah. Hanukkah, which is, as you can see here, somebody mentioned, I think, in the notes, but I have it here as well. Hanukkah, it says that, where is this here? That the bikurim you bring from Atzeret, Shavuot, until Sukkot. Okay, and almost all the fruits are ready by Sukkot, and you can bring them. But some says that you bring until Hanukkah, but you don't recite. Meaning, it's in the next year. You can't do Mikra Bikurim on the following year. But your Yehuda ben Matera said no, and he's probably thinking again of the olives, but not exclusively. Once you make the rule of the olives, you're not going to make it rule for everyone. He says you bring and you recite that that any type of bikurim you bring from the previous year all the way until Hanukkah time, because those olives are still on last year's rains and of last year's produce, and you have to thank them from the last previous year. And I think there are themes that we connect, but that's already for next time with chapter 2, which are today's holidays. Okay, so that was it. Nothing. Let's see if there's anything interesting on the Kafot Shniyot Rav Diskin. Yeah. Any other? You're welcome to unmute yourself, and if there's anything that anything else that I can add. Let's see.
Asher, can I just say something?
Sure, Ruchama.
Okay, I love this story that you told about, they're called the Hakafot Shniyot, and I was a witness to a very similar thing when this you're talking going back 20 years ago, we lived temporarily in Beit Vagan, and the Kol Torah, which is a very right-wing yeshiva at the time, they were doing Hakafot on the day after, and they were dancing in the streets and singing, and it was a very happy day. And then Rav Schlesinger came over. He saw them. I heard him yelling, "What are you doing? Bizayon Eretz Yisrael." Inside. You can do it, but not outside. And he made all the chutzniks go down inside and do it.
Eliyahu Schlesinger, right.
Right.
Eliyahu Schlesinger, yes.
Right. And I was there when he was yelling at them, and I was so impressed. Like, Bizayon Eretz Yisrael, you can't do this.
And that's something we see in the hotels, which is like almost grotesque. They're almost proud of their celebrating the extra day, which is obviously something they don't need to do. Again, some of the rabbis say you have to do it, but not the way that they do. In any case.
And I just want to thank you. I had just coincidentally finished the Chov Shamor by Rav Yoel Ben Nun, and this is such a perfect summary.
Well, I didn't say many of these things. I got. If you want to expand, Rav Yoel Ben Nun, the Chov Shamor, Rav Mordechai Breuer, Pirkei Mo'adot, Rav Professor Tabori, Yosef Tabori, Moadei Yisrael, but Kufat Mishnah Talmud. But anybody wanting to go back to the Bible, this is a great book. This small little one. Anybody, the Encyclopedia Mikra'it, edition, which I have to put like a face.
It's morphing into your background.
Yeah, I know it's sort of there, but this is a great source of
Wonderful special effects, but not efficient.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? There's so much more here. Hopefully, as I said, I will.
Outstanding.
It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Things that we see every day, but don't always fit everything in a.
No, but you spelled it out so beautifully. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very, very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
You,
guys, this is Thursday, so we will be regrouping next week on Tuesday. We have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday next week.
Great.
So, and anyone who wants to present, please be in touch with me.
Thank you, Asher.
My pleasure.
Asher, thank you. It was excellent. It was very, very good. Solid. Okay.
Thank you.